Good day, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our round table in Nursultan city. Good day to all the participants. I would like to thank you for your time and for your involvement in this discussion. The topic that we're going to discuss today is very complex and very important. I'm not that ambitious that we would eventually develop some recommendations, but at least we can try to understand the situation and share the views and opinions. I think it's a good case to do so. If you allow, I would like to introduce our speakers today, and I would like to start with our guest from Moscow, with Irina Zvyagelskaya, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor of the Chair of Eastern Oriental Knowledge, and from MGIMO, and I think we will hear a lot of interesting things, both informative and analytical, from Ms. Zvyagelskaya. I would like to also introduce Sultan Akimbekov online. He is also a professor. I have known him for quite a while. If I'm not mistaken, I even provided the comments to his candidacy paper, and if I'm not mistaken, it was devoted to Afghanistan. Another important participant is Oriel Cohen. Let me welcome you. And the most important thing is that I read your article in Newsweek regarding Afghanistan, and indeed it raised a lot of thoughts with me, and some of your analytical thoughts were very interesting for me. To my right is a well-known person in our country, Omirtay Bitimov, who is our ambassador in Afghanistan, and he managed the intelligence office in Kazakhstan. I would like to also welcome Husain Haqqani. He is a diplomat, and he is now doing a lot of analytical work. If I'm not mistaken, you were the ambassador of Afghanistan to US. Is that right? The Pakistan ambassador to Washington, yes. The next participant of our panel session going along is Bakhtiyar Ergashev. He is a prominent analyst and expert. He is the director of research initiative Banao, and he is working on this particular issue. I looked at your work of the Afghan North and problems in the Central Asia, which is going to be the key topic of our discussion today. Thank you for you being with us today. And I would also like to introduce Mr. Mirzoyev, who is a political scientist. In my notes, I can see that you are the former military person, and you also worked in the security bodies like McCain. And I think that this is going to be the view from Tajikistan, which would be very interesting and useful for our discussion. I would like to take you back 20 years ago. 20 years ago exactly, myself and Omirtay Bitimov were members of the delegation, and I probably was the chairperson of this delegation who first visited Kabul after the active military actions were over. It was semi-destroyed Kabul. We had a lot of meetings, and it was the temporary government, a temporary president, Mr. Karzai, and we met with him as well. And at that stage, there were only 5 embassies, if I'm not mistaken. And I had courtesy visits to all the embassies, including the US embassy. And my question to the US ambassador was, are you going to stay here long? he said, until we stop drug trafficking, we will stay here. But the history shows that the drug trafficking is not yet defeated, mildly speaking, and even the American troops have left Afghanistan. So for me, it is important to think about what is the current status in Afghanistan. I understand that everything is going to change and pretty fast, and it will be difficult to trace all the details, but probably trying to identify the key trends in the region would be probably the most important thing. My understanding is that nobody can deny political geography, and Afghanistan is a country of Central Asia, including Mongolia. And from the point of view of geopolicy, geopolitics, geostrategy, and geoeconomy, this is an absolutely important territory of the entire Eurasian continent. And we may try not only to share the views on how and what is going to happen in Afghanistan and how it will influence the Central Asian region, but if it is possible to look at it in a wider sense. That's my request to all the speakers. I would like to give the floor to Husain Haqqani, who knows the policy of the United States, and he knows the movement of Talibs and Afghanistan.
This one. Thank you very much. You were kind enough to start by saying that I know the policy of the United States. Right now, I think nobody knows the policy of the United States in relation to Afghanistan. I think what happened was that I often joke in America because I was born in Pakistan and am now in America. I can afford to make jokes with my American friends. And I say to them that America does not lose wars. America only loses interest. And in case of Afghanistan, something similar happened. Out of 20 years, 16 years, the Americans were talking about when will we withdraw, when will we leave. That essentially signaled to the Taliban that they just have to wait the Americans out. Pakistan, which was supporting the Taliban, even though people like me from Pakistan did not agree with that policy, even Pakistan decided that just waiting out the Americans is the best course. Eventually, President Trump decided that for political reasons, it was important for him to withdraw. And he was persuaded at that time to enter into negotiations with the Taliban. The Taliban, who sent representatives to Doha for talks, were focused only on American withdrawal. And if you read the Doha Agreement does not talk about peace, even though it has the word peace in it. It only talks about American withdrawal and Taliban's conditions, 5,000 prisoners to be released. And then the Taliban in return promise only two things. One, that they will not allow their territory to be used for attacks against other countries. It does not say it will not allow to have terrorist groups organized there. It only says it will not allow attacks from Afghanistan on other countries. And the second thing the Taliban promised was that they will start talks with the then Afghan government. Anyway, they did not make any public renunciation of relations with Al-Qaeda, which was the reason why the Americans had gone there. The American attempt to try and continue to have some kind of a power-sharing agreement totally failed. And in the end, now the Taliban control the country. The Taliban are seeking a monopoly of power. They have made a cabinet of 33 people. 17 of those 33 people are UN-designated terrorists. That shows that as far as they are concerned, they are not interested in international legitimacy like the Americans thought they would be interested in. Similarly, they do need economic assistance because Afghanistan is a country that is heavily dependent on donor and foreign inputs. 80% of the GDP of Afghanistan up until recently was dependent upon external flows, whether it is aid, whether it is loans from outside. half of the population of Afghanistan depends on food aid, including 10 million children who need it from abroad. So right now, I think that we have a standoff in which the American government, for political reasons, does not want to acknowledge that it made a bad deal with the Taliban, that it made a hurried withdrawal that was very disorganized. The Americans are focused on getting only the Americans that are still in Afghanistan, and there are still some Americans who are in Afghanistan, American citizens. They are interested in getting them out. They are interested in getting some of the Afghans who worked closely with the Americans in the last 20 years to get them out and bring them to the United States. But at the same time, there is an increasing awareness in Washington. And yesterday, Secretary of State Tony Blinken came before the US Senate and acknowledged that the Haqqani network, which is the most important component of the Taliban, not related to me, by the way, that they are a terrorist organization. Their leader, Sirajuddin Haqqani, who was responsible for attacking the American embassy in 2011, has been made the interior minister, which means he's responsible for law and order. That group is still a terrorist group, that it still maintains ties with Al-Qaeda. The only hope that the Americans can have is that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda do not like the Islamic State. The Islamic State of Khorasan province. And so that is one group that they will act against. But I think that other extremist and Islamist groups will congregate back in Afghanistan like they did before. And the Taliban will argue that we did not promise that we will not give refuge to our fellow Muslims. Only thing we promised is that they will not make attacks against anybody. But even there is a very complicated argument that the Taliban make. Recently, the Taliban spokesman, Zabihullah Mujahid, he said that we have not seen any evidence that Osama bin Laden was responsible for 9/11, which basically means that in their worldview, and these people are very conservative, very limited in their interpretation of Islam, and they do not consider the word of unbelievers as the same as that of the believer. So therefore, the evidence that the Americans or the others may have had of anybody being involved in terrorism is not necessarily acceptable to them. So where do we see things going? Quickly, I think that among the immediate impacts that we will see is a flow of refugees into all of Afghanistan's neighboring countries. That includes Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, and eventually and Pakistan and Iran. And all of these countries will have to bear in mind that they have international obligations to allow refugees to come in. The second is going to be the American need for a physical presence in the neighborhood and in the region. They had a base in Afghanistan. From there, they could control and manage and continue to do what they call intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance missions. Now, they will look for something of that nature from either Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Pakistan has already said that it will not allow that. Iran is not possible for that because of the difficult relationship with the United States and Iran. I do not think that there will be an immediate recognition of the Taliban regime by most of the world. And because of that, the Taliban will create a chicken and egg argument. They will say, we will become moderate if you give us the funding. But the world will say, we will give you funding only if you become moderate. And this will be very similar to the kind of arguments that we had when the last time the Taliban were in power. But even if the Taliban do keep their promise of becoming more moderate, my question is, how can somebody who believes that what they do, what they act upon is the word of God, how much can they moderate? They can't change their belief about women. They can't change their belief about minorities. They can't change their belief about the modern world. They can't change their beliefs about what kind of system they will have inside Afghanistan. So therefore, they can only change in words. They can't change in deeds. And so we will continue to have a problem inside Afghanistan with its impact on the region. In case of the Central Asian republics, everybody will have to bear in mind that there will be a revival and a resurgence of radical Islamism. All radical Islamist groups that have, because of the policies of the governments of the region, all of these groups have actually been sidelined and have become less important. I think that they will resurge because here is the simple narrative. The Islamists will say, with our belief in jihad, we drove the Soviet Union out in 1989. Now, with our belief in jihad, we have pushed the Americans out. So therefore, jihad and Islamic belief system that they have, the radical Islamist extremist belief, that is the only way forward. And so there will be a definite rise in religious extremism, even if it is not immediately manifested in terrorist attacks around the world.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed. And it is I have just maybe one as a point of clarification, maybe, and the second one as a question. And these two issues are coincided between. First of all, and because in my understanding, my feeling, I'm not so involved in the Afghan policy and as, for example, General Bitimov, but my thinking is that if we take into consideration the whole story and whole history of Afghanistan, for example, and the 19th century, this is the Britons, and the 20th century, this is USSR and etc., Americans, etc. Because in my understanding, that's an absolutely unique historical time for these people, for the people of Afghanistan, just to provide very balanced or to introduce a very balanced concept of the governmental building. This is absolutely, and now is the time for Afghani people and maybe for Taliban to make real the promises of the whole Afghani people to do something in order to build their country by themselves. And this is absolutely a unique story in my understanding.
Absolutely.
And it will be very, very, very deeply depends. For example, what will be, for example, especially in my understanding, the inter-ethnic relationships and inclusive government. This is 2 points which needs to be responded by Taliban immediately. This is my point of view. And the second one, Ambassador, because you know the story of all Taliban, and it's just my question for you. What is the difference between Taliban of 2001 and 2021?
So the second question is easier for me to answer. I think that the Taliban have become more media savvy. They know how to present to the international media. The Taliban of 2001, if you remember, did not allow television. They broke the television sets that people owned. But these Taliban, they come on television and they tell a story. But in practice, the difference is very limited. I think that despite the fact that they have engaged in Doha with the world, the fact remains that the people who have emerged as really powerful are the people who never left either Afghanistan or the border areas of Pakistan. So the Amir of the Taliban, nobody has seen him. The Sirajuddin Haqqani, the Interior Minister, the Prime Minister is again a hardliner. He used to be the Chief of Staff of Mullah Umar. So the people who came to Doha are different people. And they are not as important in the new government that the Taliban have created. As far as inclusiveness is concerned, yes, inclusiveness is desirable. Afghanistan's ethnic makeup has changed over the decades. The Pashtuns are not an absolute majority in Afghanistan anymore. They are the largest group, but then there is a very large Tajik population, there is a very large Hazara population, and there is a very large Uzbek population. And so all of these groups have to have representation. The government they have created, 33 ministers, 1 Uzbek, 2 Tajik, no Hazara, that is totally unrepresentative. 30 out of 33 are Pashtuns, and they are Pashtuns primarily from the areas that border Pakistan. And so essentially, those who criticize the Taliban as being a group that has emerged out of Pakistan and its madrasas, and being very close to the Pakistani intelligence apparatus, I think that they are being proved right now. That instead of a new Taliban who are broad-based and are willing to talk to everybody else and say, oh yes, Uzbeks, or yes, Hazaras, or yes, Tajiks, please come into the government. These are people who have not even included non-Taliban Pashtuns into the government. Not one. Karzai, Abdullah, they were talking to the Taliban leaders, but they have not been included in the government. So I think that we are finding that this is a classic case of the representatives of the Taliban who talked to the world, who went to Doha, who went to Beijing, who went to the other capitals, that they are very suave, but that the real leadership they are representing is not necessarily thinking the same way. And that is going to be a problem. Ideally, Afghanistan should have an inclusive government in which people give and take. But my argument is that how can you give and take when your belief is that you are doing what God wants you to do? That is why it is so important to keep religion and politics separate. Because when you think you are acting on behalf of God, then there is no compromise. As human beings, we can compromise. But true believers, very difficult for them to compromise.
Thank you, Ambassador. And in my understanding that maybe so it will be a good opportunity maybe at the end of our discussions to come to conclusion, or not just to conclusion, just to make to widespread the idea, is it possible, or do we have the possibility with Taliban to build the government on the balanced, well manner? And let us see. Я понимаю, что
I do understand that tomorrow, on this and the day after that, on the 16th and the 7th, we are going to be having a large-scale event in Tajikistan, 2 summits, the CSTO summit and Shanghai Cooperative Organization summit is also going to be held there. I do have a question to Ms. Zvyagelskaya. Would you please share your ideas and thoughts about what is going on in Afghanistan and how the situation is going to be developed? And perhaps you could talk to us about those 2 international organizations and the way those 2 organizations could become instrumental, so to speak, in not finding a solution, but I need to be more accurate in addressing the problems that may arise. Irina, the floor is yours, please. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to participate to your forum. I'm very pleased and honored to see the people whom I'm familiar with. And I would like to say that I do represent not the department of Moscow Diplomatic Service Institute, and the question that you were addressed consists of 2 parts. What is going to be happening in Afghanistan and how this could have an impact upon the countries neighboring to Afghanistan and overall an impact in Central Asian states and what can be done overall. To start with, I'd like to say that unfortunately, when it comes to the situation in Afghanistan, we're facing a very high level of uncertainty, and there's a impression, a negative certainty. So overall, we do realize that unfortunately, the positive development of situation is hardly to be expected, at least in the upcoming future. And it is evident that the Taliban is fragmented, and the part of the Taliban movement has a large weight in Afghanistan. A part of it just represents Taliban as a new, more or less adequate force to negotiate and to engage. For instance, the question is, where's the line in between the terrorists and the people who are responsible for governance, for reconstruction of the state? This is something that we will need to find out more. This is something that we've been facing in other regions and other countries where people whom would be taken as terrorists by a part of international community. They take responsibility of state governance in absence of the state. But in this case, the situation is even more complex. Over here, we have to be talking about this, building the state, and as a minimum, we have to prevent the humanitarian catastrophe everybody is talking about. Because for 3 years, they had problems with harvest, and we know that over 40% of agricultural fields have been destroyed in Afghanistan. So the question is how to feed Afghanis. And in accordance with different estimations, we're speaking about 38 million people, almost 40 million people. So what should we do about that? Isn't it going to lead to a large-scale refugee movement from those zones that they are not able of finding food because of hunger? Not because they do accept or do not accept Taliban, just because this is going to become a matter of survival for these people. So, and over here, I think that we have to address a very important issue. How carefully will the current Taliban leadership will treat that issue, because the development may be ensured if you cover that part. And that part needs the efforts in terms of salary provisions, for instance, and some cultural space as well to be ensured. And at the same time, I'd like to say that some representatives of Taliban say that they're ready to address the international community to accept the experts that we're missing in order to develop our economy. However, if the cultural situation is going to remain the way it is now, the reality is that not many international community representatives will be able or would agree to come to Afghanistan. So the question is, how ready are we to close, how ready Taliban is to close their eyes to some cultural aspects? And without international support, it is hard to imagine Afghan's future. So I think that Afghanistan is more dependent from Central Asian countries. Of course, they may not compete with Uzbekistan or Iran. However, we do perfectly realize that Uzbekistan, for instance, has exported electric power, and uninterruptedly electricity was provided to Kabul 24/7. Uzbekistan has been building and keeps building automobile and railroads in Afghanistan, and we are all aware about the project called Connectivity, that is to connect Central and South Asia and ensure the logistics and access to the ports. So it depends hugely on the situation in Afghanistan. The Talibs themselves may become beneficiaries if reconstruction efforts like the ones that I have mentioned about will keep developing. However, if the state as a state will not be functioning, then the issue about construction of new logistical hub is going to be taken off the table. I would like to say that Kazakhstan also plays a huge role in that issue. Kazakhstan, even though not having the borders, has the program for reconstruction of Afghanistan. And besides, Kazakhstan is a serious player at the wheat market. And of course, this matters a lot, especially taking into account the current situation. Tajikistan has been exporting some electric power to Afghanistan, the excess electric power they have. So dependency that has been established within the framework of many years still remains, and it will be expanded. However, at the same time, we need to meet new challenges in Afghanistan, and I think we shouldn't be just speaking about the refugees and the massive movement of refugees from Afghanistan. I think that the dissemination of destructive ideas is something that there are no borders, and borders do not play a huge role. And at the same time, we have to mention that this is going to be having a demonstration like effect for those who disseminate radical ideology, to demonstrate the success. You have to understand that from our standpoint, those people who came are radicals, and they are not perfectly suited for their role. This is our assessment. There are other assessments as well, and we have to take that into account. It turns out to be that Islamists may defeat the strongest empire in the globe. They may be successful, and taking into account that there is corruption, and this demonstrative effect may be pretty destructive. And I think that this is something that we have to pay our attention, firstly. So secondly, I would like to go back to your question regarding the activity of Collective Security Treaty Organization and Shanghai Cooperation Organization and what may be done in this regard. It is evident that when we speak about the joint exercises, joint actions on prevention of any attacks from the territory of Afghanistan, I think that the role of CSTO or SCO is going to be growing. However, at the same time, I think that the role of bilateral military and political organizations and efforts is going to grow as well. It depends on the seriousness of the military threat coming from Afghanistan. But this is just one side of the coin. At the same time, if we look at Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for instance, it has a huge economic potential. Again, depending on how the new leaders of Afghanistan are going to behave like, and depending on the situation, the SCO may be engaged to provide humanitarian support and so on and so forth. At the moment, it is hard to say how situation in Afghanistan will allow to do so. And I may not come to the conclusions. I think that at the moment we're at the state of a great uncertainty, and I'm afraid that this uncertainty isn't going to be eliminated soon. So we have to take defense-like military actions, and on the other hand, I have no doubts that we have to look if we do have new opportunities currently, and if there are no new opportunities, how can we get those? It goes without saying that the Talibs are going to be in Afghanistan for a long time, and ensuring a reasonable development of Afghanistan is going to be in compliance with the interests of the globe. Thank you so much, Irina, for such a thorough presentation and remarks. When you talked, actually, I realized and was reassured again that finding a solution for all security matters have to be based on the major principle supported by the entire global community. It is indivisibility of security. You talked very well about the cultural and humanitarian dimension and the role it plays in that region, and the economic component and political and military component. So the issues referring to all problems of security. So over here we're speaking about making those issues more and more evident. It is hard to say at the moment about some positive.
И что надо как-то вот все-таки понимать, что будет дальше.
We have to understand that we will have to face the terrorism issue. Those are the long-lasting problems of our diplomacy, the lack of a definition for terrorism. There is no pure internationally agreed definition of terrorism. This is a philosophical standpoint. We do know what the terrorist act is. We know what terrorist group is, but terrorism as a phenomenon is something that has not yet been defined. And this has be another impetus. The Pandora box is something that we need to open. We have to start negotiating. We have to be actively involved and engaged in discussing these matters. I would like now to give the floor to Ariel Cohen. He's a well-known expert not only in Kazakhstan but worldwide. Ariel, I wanted to ask you the following question. In your opinion, I'm out of the position.
Or something like this, or what was something in the 19th century or a little bit later. But my understanding is, what about the role of Russia, for example, for this time being in this particular area, and the China, which is the role is increasing from day to day. This is my question to you, if everything is going well, I mean, connection, you understand me? Do you understand me?
Yes, I did. У меня вопрос, Kairat.
I do have a question, Kairat. The majority of our audience, is it Russian speaking? All right, I have prepared myself to address the audience in English because the volume of material that I have read, to get myself prepared to this conference. So therefore, I might be having some technical issues translating from English into Russian. However, I will try to do my best. And I would like to seek for your apology. I had to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, so at 5 o'clock the conference was about to commence. So yesterday I flew back from Europe, so at the moment I have 2 excuses for being a little bit tired. So I would like to send my warm greetings to Husain Haqqani.
It's ridiculous that we see each other in Kazakhstan and not where we live. Давайте начнем.
Let us start from one very important issue that has been touched upon by my colleagues. It was identified as a conflict between Taliban and Al-Qaeda from one side, and ISIS, Daesh from the other hand. For our Russian-speaking audience, it is going to be easier to comprehend, as if we would put, the construction of the Islamic State in one state in Afghanistan. I would like to cite one of the Georgian poems, Mr. Joseph Stalin, the construction against Trotsky model of jihadi revolution. So I don't want to call them neo-transformators. Well, anyway, I would like to say that the concept of caliphate is presented in a time when the leader of the Taliban movement is called Amir.
The Amir of the believers, but still within the framework of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. This is an important difference that we all need to understand. That is the establishment of the emirate with all its handicapped features and characteristics in one country. Will they comply with their promise to the Trump administration and personally to the special ambassador Zavai that will not transport jihad, or will it turn into what is called in Arab Al-Qaeda al-Islam, which is the base of jihad? Which kind of jihad? The global one, and to begin with it could be regional jihad. And now I would smoothly get into the so-called fork, the fork either to the north or to the east. I would like to propose the audience, based on my studies, interviews, and discussions, that the Pakistanis who support and who provide the cover or the roof to the regime of Taliban, Pakistanis are now thinking, having a dilemma. Can they take advantage of Taliban and this long-term jihad against India in Kashmir? Or, on the other hand, if they start unwinding that, they could move some of the Kashmiri army troops to another place and to warm them up, and this can result in further destabilization in Pakistan. And Hussein knows much more than I do about destabilization, and he would rather explain his thought. But the issue of the further stability inside Afghanistan, given the model of the jihad development and the threat of it against the creators, and speaking from Washington, we understand that you support this, sorry for this word, bullshit, and for your troopers, and then this dragon will move back and can attack you. This is the Kashmiri area. The second one is towards Central Asia, which is a challenge for Kazakhstan, and more importantly for Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. And here we are again facing the issue of to what extent the supporters of building an emirate in a single country would be able to control the Islamic Trotskys to get the international support that my colleagues have already mentioned about. And this support could, based on the English proverb, carrot and stick, it could serve as the carrot that will be kept in front of the government in Kabul so that they behave well. And at the same time, and what is important is that all the that $9 or $10 billion that Americans have frozen as the currency reserves of the previous government is in Afghanistan, that some people could not take away from the country. Let me accelerate my presentation. Next is China. What is important for America, in my view, is China won 1-0 against America. This is number one. The military victory of China outside PRC, outside historical China, they have defeated Afghanistan by proxy via Pakistan, and there is a big question mark. China doesn't have major experience of dealing with radical Islamic organizations, and they have a double interest, both economic and geopolitical. Economically, all the infrastructure projects that are being already negotiated in Afghanistan, including a highway to Gwadar. This includes the extension of the railway from Mazar-e-Sharif further to Kabul, Peshawar, and probably to the seaports of Pakistan. And this is also important, by the way, for all the Central Asian colleagues. This also includes the further development of CASA project for electricity, high voltage lines. Also the copper mines that Chinese are looking at, and probably what you wrote in 2007 with my colleague Curtis, who managed with Trump's administration, the chief director of the National Security Board for Central Asia, and the project Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan as the gas pipeline that would supply gas to Pakistan from Turkmenistan to the south, and it will be a win-win for all the parties if Chinese can agree with Pakistan and Taliban on ensuring safety, and a geopolitical factor, which is by strengthening its position in Afghanistan, controlling infrastructure, and being already the key partner or chief partner for Pakistan, China will surround India up to the Indian Ocean and surrounding it from 3 sides already. And this is an important thing for the Indian guys, especially given that historically there were lots of links between the Indian culture and Afghanistan culture in art, in cuisine, in politics. So all those links have existed for centuries, but at the same time, China is now changing the entire geopolitical balance. As for Russia, Russia could not act balanced, and they expressed some joy because of the defeat of Americans in Afghanistan. And given that the trainings or exercises of 2020 were aimed not to the south but to the west, but the challenges for the Russian alliance will be in Central Asia, not to the western borders. Will Russia be able, in cooperation with Central Asian countries, probably with China, but not the fact that China is interested in this cooperation. Probably they are more interested in strengthening their own position, playing the game together with Pakistan and Afghanistani government of Taliban. And Russia will have to seriously undertake the burden of ensuring safety. Will the Chinese pay for that? I have very much doubts about it, and I'm not sure that they will support this idea. The most important question, in my view, is whether the governments of the neighboring countries will find the common language, and Kazakhstan being the traditional platform for negotiation. Will the Central Asian government find a common ground for discussion with Afghanistan, with Kabul, to prevent infiltration of the troops of Islamic jihadis and to prevent political, religious, and ideological unbalancing of the boat and swinging of the boat? Because as my colleagues have already mentioned, that there is corruption, there is poverty, though I very much hope that people, even if they look at the picture in the TV set on what is happening in Afghanistan, will think whether do we need to swing the boat so that we will then get into this awful black hole when all our daughters and wives will be turned into the black garments and will cause even more complex economic conditions right now in our country. I travel a lot, and for me, the rational person looking at what Taliban has brought to Afghanistan can draw a conclusion that we don't need that. But I'm not a local citizen of the Central Asian country. As for drawing a political line with Kabul, indeed, all the neighbors and all big empires states will have to negotiate, and Russia and China are already negotiating, and some other countries are claiming that they're not going to recognize, but still they get into the negotiations. And humanitarian aid is good and is right from the moral viewpoint because people are starving, and I am personally involved in providing this aid. I'm not going to discuss it. I'm trying to help people in Afghanistan. But the question here is as follows. Speaking about the moral side of the topic. Is it a moral thing that Americans and other Western countries, having worked for 20 years in this very complex country, left in many cases people unassisted, or in some cases they tried to somehow assist, but dozens and thousands of people left them unassisted, including security, police, interpreters, activists who promoted the female rights. And in fact, a lot of progress was achieved in emancipation of women in Afghanistan, and education as well. There were teachers, professors, and faculty and experts. As my dear colleague, Ms. Zvyagelskaya, said, that without expertise, they would be hard to survive. In fact, this reminds me of the dilemmas that the Bolshevist power faced when they destroyed the culture and elite of Russian Empire on the one hand, and then selling the paintings, gold, and selling it to the Western, and bringing Western technologies and Western engineers to keep the Bolshevism experiment on stand, even during the Second World War. Colleagues, I can see that you are fully awake, despite the fact that you woke up very early. Bearing in mind that I have 4 more speakers in the list, I think what was important for me to say, I stated. Thanks a lot. It was all very wise and very clever. You said a lot about involvement in China, including construction and so on. I think it means a lot. You remember what happened in 2001, that after that there was a great number of the donorship conferences in Japan, whichever country it was. I personally was involved in 2 or 3 conferences like that. So I think that this economic component plays a great role that can either stabilize or destabilize the situation. And I would like to draw the attention of my colleagues that tomorrow we will have the meetings of the Security Council and SCO, and this could be a nice situation for the governments and for the presidents to discuss the topics that Ariel raised. Thank you very much. When I was preparing for this meeting, I looked at, just by chance, that, very many political reporters and lead experts, in particular in the United States, in Europe, when they speak about the Afghani issue, they start looking at Central Asia and they draw parallels, and they say that Central Asia is becoming a very important region. I would like to refer to the article in National Interest on the 5th of June of Kamran Bukhari. Probably you saw his article, and he states that obviously we need a neutral platform that would be used as the basis to achieve a major objective in Afghanistan, taking into account the significant experience of multilateral diplomacy. Kazakhstan could become such a platform. This article, this is also the article from Jan Shebutaysky in Hill. He also says that, why not we come back to the idea that exists already as the Asian meeting of the trust and security. Afghanistan is a member country, and this was the initiative of Nazarbayev as the president, with 27 member countries. And it could, there could be a kind of a section or subsection for Afghanistan where Uzbekistan and Tajikistan and all other Central Asian countries and other stakeholders could participate, including Pakistan and India. So I think that all the players, including China, could be present there, and this could be a nice platform to become the path for finding some kind of concord. And with this, I would like to ask my Central Asian colleagues. I would like to give the first to our Uzbek colleague, Mr. Ergashev. The floor is yours, and then Saimiddin. And then we will listen to two Kazakhstani experts who complete our discussion if you don't have any objections. Thank you very much. The floor is yours. Thanks, colleagues. Now, a few words about the new turn that will have to be made in the external policy of Uzbekistan, given the events in Afghanistan, in particular, the fact that exactly 1 month ago, Afghanistan was conquered by Talibs. So we are all now thinking what is going to happen. What happened on the 15th of August? Several things have happened that could be noted. Number one, during the last 100 years, the fourth failed attempt to modernize Afghanistan. It is again that the rural areas defeated urban areas, and it is for the fourth time that the rural farmers defeated the cities, the urbans. From the point of view of geopolitics, the geopolitical structure that was being built during the last 20 years at least was broken. However, the construction started earlier, and the objective was to have the direct military presence of US in the big area, big region, that could be called a major region of Central Asia, including Middle East. And this structure was broken. From the point of view of geoeconomics, there is a big issue that my colleagues have discussed. What do we do with all these projects from the geoeconomic point of view, including infrastructure, transport, logistics, and others? Roughly speaking, who is going to pay for them? Will China be capable to do so, or will it be willing to do so, because there are no other players that could be involved in this field of major geopolitical and geoeconomic projects, because US who could do that is no longer there. And from this viewpoint, the important issue for the neighboring countries would be what to do with the new Afghanistan. With Afghanistan, where the security issues are not addressed, whichever is stated by the Talibs, if the security issues are not addressed, then the issues of the economic development, investment climate formation are not addressed, and therefore the economic development is not decided. If there is no economic development, we will inevitably have the forced economic migration, refugees, and then no strict border protection measures will not be able to stop them. How the most important and the key issue of the internal Afghani policy will be addressed, which is the correlation between the various ethnic groups in the country. If this is not addressed, the internal Afghani conflict cannot be addressed.
Up until we don't see the positive changes in that regard. And how will Taliban work with the terrorist organizations that have been present and will keep to be present in Afghanistan? We have had an experience back in 1996 when the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan was present in Afghanistan, and there were clear attempts to break the regional security system while invading Uzbekistan through Bakhtiyar Valley in Kyrgyzstan. So Uzbekistan has certain algorithm when Taliban comes to its power and the strikes in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan. So what is going to be happening as a scenario we have experienced already is going to be repeated, because ISIS-K has been merged with Haqqani chain, and saying that the Talibs are going to be fighting with them. This is something that generates lots of doubts. And in this regard, we will have to think about how to keep working with Afghanistan. Up until 2017, the foreign policy of Uzbekistan in terms of Afghanistan was a strictly pragmatic foreign policy. We kept working on the projects that were interesting for us. For instance, the construction of the first Kairat on Mazari Sharif Railroad kilometers, and that was constructed by the Uzbek constructors. We have also implemented large projects in terms of electric power generation, and this led to the fact that 55% of all imported electric power to Afghanistan is Uzbekistan generated. However, at the same time, Uzbekistan was strictly closed on other directions and in other dimensions, and I call that policy a strict pragmatic policy, and that policy lasted until 2018. And back in 2018, the new stage of foreign policy has started. When we looked previously at Afghanistan as a factor of threat for national and regional security, starting from 2017, Uzbekistan decided to look at Afghanistan as at the zone of cooperation, of a potential possibility of cooperation, and that policy lasted for the last 3 years. For instance, in political sphere in Uzbekistan, they started speaking about Afghanistan being a part of Central Asia. Those talks would never be held before. As an example, back in January of 2019, there was a new format, India plus Central Asia plus Afghanistan. Previously, it was even not imaginable before 2017. In economic sphere, for instance, if to compare 2015, the turnover amounted to 14 million. Back in 2019, the trade turnover amounted to $776 million US dollars. Before that, it was 400 million. So it would not be imaginable to have an educational center in Termes to train Afghan young men and women be trained in 34 different professions, and they had 2 cohorts comprised of 136 people and 136 professionals ready to work. And here comes the 15th of August of 2021, and the new foreign policy of Uzbekistan is now at the edge of making a choice. So the question is whether the foreign policy is going to be continued or is the foreign policy of Uzbekistan is going to be transformed? I can hardly imagine to have India plus Central Asia plus Afghanistan meetings to be held. The regime of military and political movement being acknowledged as terrorist one is ruling the country. So why do you think that Afghanistan is a part of Central Asia? Let us prove that. How will you be following that format, taking into account new conditions? For instance, in December last year, there was an agreement on mutual trade to be signed between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. So the question is whether what type of agreement is it going to be, how this agreement is going to look like, and the intention was to have our turnover, increased almost in threefolds by $2 billion in 2023. So who is going to be implementing that program? Who is going to be reaching those numbers? Now the current picture is that when Uzbekistan has to make a choice, and unfortunately, there is a huge impact from of the region players making its impact upon that choice. For instance, in terms of refugees, it is hard to imagine. However, Uzbekistan has to be defending its position when it comes to acceptance of refugees. And if IGIL Khorasan issue isn't going to be solved, it is clearly said that Uzbekistan is a territory of future caliphate. If it is not solved, are you going to be constructing Mazar-e-Sharif, Kabul-Peshawar road if they don't have that issue with ISIS sorted out? Are you going to address other issues, for instance? So the foreign policy of Uzbekistan is now to be making a choice. So I think that the foreign policy of Uzbekistan is going to have features of the strict pragmatic nature. So let us concentrate on the most interesting projects, and the rest is going to be left for the future. So I think that the foreign policy of Uzbekistan is going to be seriously shifted, and we will see how pragmatic and how strict it is going to be. Thank you so much, Bakhtiyar, for your statements. I do realize that you mentioned about the economic dimension, and post-2017, I mean, the security dimension became the prevailing priority of Uzbekistan. And I think that there is a great share of truth, and I think that this is something that is necessary to be done. However, from the theoretical standpoint, the economic dimension when it comes to security, it is the least studied dimension. Why? Is that you kept mentioning about ISIS and the Taliban movement. It is a political and military dimension, cultural and humanitarian dimension, and in all of those dimensions, it is very important to keep the balance between all of those dimensions. So hypertrophic attempt to consume all of these issues, I think it is going to be a way to nowhere because the security issues may not be addressed in all of those multiple dimensions at the same time. So searching for the balance is something that is important in our practices. Mr. Mirzoyev, please, the representative from Tajikistan, the floor is yours. Thank you so much. What I was going to say to you, gentlemen, you are well aware about the sequence of events that have happened in Afghanistan. Our honorable president kept saying that the security in Central Asia depends on stability in Afghanistan. If there is no stability in Afghanistan, then certainly we should be concerned about security in the region, especially in Central Asia. So what do we have now? As a matter of fact, we have a country being ruled by Islamic radicals, and that country has its borders with Central Asia, and it serves as a threat not only to Central Asia, but the threat to the entire region, and we suffer. And practically, it is a complex of threats being represented by Afghanistan and the threat to Central Asia, first of all. I think that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we feel the negative processes being run in the region because of instability in Afghanistan. I shouldn't just mention Islamic radicalism or terrorism. You're well aware about the fact that we have for instance, illicit dissemination of drugs. In Central Asia, we have many drug addicts, and law enforcement agencies of these countries are well aware about this fact. And now we've been facing the threat of Islamic radicalism, and Islamic radicalism is growing in Afghanistan currently. And our colleague from Pakistan has mentioned about the fact that it is hard to believe in those radicals. And we have held negotiations with China, Russia, United States of America. However, has a single state stated that the commitment given by Taliban would be adhered to. There was a promise to make a coalition government, for instance, to take into account the interests of minorities living in Afghanistan, for instance. There were many instances like that before while negotiated with the Afghanis. However, not a single commitment was adhered to. And they even promised not to enter Kabul. However, they did it. So how can you speak with such radicals who are ruling Afghanistan at the moment? And another important issue, another component, is that within Taliban, there are over 20 groups. I'm not mentioning foreign teams. It is within Taliban itself, over 20 different groups. And I think that our colleague from Pakistan may confirm that Pakistan is interested in getting to know those radicals well, because those radicals serve as a threat to Pakistan as well. Afghanistan is not only a threat to Central Asia, it is a similar threat to Pakistan as well. So let us take the foreign component, for instance. Let us look at the composition of the Taliban movement in accordance with the formal statements made by the Minister of Interior of Afghanistan. 21 international terrorist organizations are present in Afghanistan and have good relationships with the Taliban movement. And partially it refers to those groups and those organizations that are related to Central Asia. Just the same, what is going to be happening to those organizations? Of course, many people think about the actions of the government of Afghanistan and what type of government it is going to be in Afghanistan. Everybody is concentrated on the central powers. However, nobody is thinking about what those radical teams are doing in the provinces. Why Taliban is quiet? Why openly do they make lies to everybody? Everybody understands that those groups exist there. Competent bodies do realize that those little groups are disseminated throughout the provinces of Afghanistan. So the global community and the regional players have to realize and have to understand thoroughly what motivation was taken into account to make Taliban revive. You know, why should the office in Qatar to be opened? Why did they have to be released from the prisons, for instance, and penal institutions? So we have to go into the scientific studies and surveys. However, we need some time for that. So what needs to be done in a perspective in the future in order to ensure security of the countries of the region? And I would like to also mention about a very important issue, which is regional security. There are different systems. Pakistan has a different regional security system and national security system. The countries of Central Asia have different. Uzbekistan has its own, Tajikistan has its own, China, Iran have their own regional security systems. If you feel the threat of Islamic radicalism, why the countries of the regions, not only Central Asia, do not get together and establish a joint regional security system? And this is a contradiction that arises in the field of security, and in the future this may be a complexity, an additional complexity to the current situation. So how can you be calm enough to defeat your positions? And those are the questions that we have to address while speaking about the threats. And retrospectively, there were many examples. However, the fact is, and the reality is, that the power is concentrated in the hands of radicals. And what needs to be done? There is no joint concept of the regional players, and having different assessments, different interests in such a fast-tracking format is something that is going to be harmful. And in Dushanbe, we've been discussing these issues as well. However, Dushanbe isn't the one player to make the solution. However, I think that our competent bodies have to study the processes happening in Afghanistan in a more thorough way, and I would like them to ensure national security. And because transformation is very fast. Thank you so much. Saimiddin, I was always for a thorough preparation for having surveys because this is one of the most important components while making a decision. And undoubtedly, security in Central Asia is dependent on what is going on in Afghanistan. However, political geography may not be taken off the table. Afghanistan was and it remains a part of Central Asia. So will Talibs keep their promises or won't keep their promises? You have to understand that, for instance, I tried to make an analysis of who they were, 20 years ago. They're aging. I looked at their statements when they actually came to the office, and that movement has some reasonable seed, the movement that is trying to propose something, is trying to digest the situation. However, how successful it is going to be, one issue is when you are in an opposition and when you're trying to conquer, and you think that this needs to be done and the second needs to be done. However, there's a different thing when you are in the office, and on a daily basis, you have to construct. On a daily basis, you have to build your state. And I think that as of today, Talibs do not have a system of ideas and thoughts about how the state of Afghanistan is to be developed. So I would like to briefly add that, to have power is simple to be done, right? But to run and to govern is something that is hard to be completed. And I would like to be I would like to now give the floor to Omirtay Bitimov, who has chaired our foreign intelligence for many, many years, and he used to be our ambassador to Afghanistan, and I have great memories about our first visit to Afghanistan back in 2001. While speaking to you, it was 3 or 4 years ago, you wrote to me that you were in Afghanistan back then, and you said that I'm concerned that the Talibs will be running the country. It was 4 years ago. Taking into account that you used to be working in Afghanistan during the Soviet times, you do have a chance to make a comparative analysis in between what it used to be and what it is now. So please, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for such a great attempt. I would like to thank you for this great opportunities, and I will try to do my best. I got myself prepared. However, I don't want to repeat what has already been said. Yes, indeed, starting from 1980, when it was my first visit, I used to be visiting and working in Afghanistan, and the Soviet contingent was deployed up there back then. Communists wanted to bring good life, then it was Islamists, then Talibs, then Americans wanted to impose democracy, their version of democracy in Afghanistan, and Afghanis themselves were not that actively participating, and just a part of Afghanis were involved and engaged, and the interest of all layers of the society were not taken into account. So those experiments were not successful. Back in 1989, after the withdrawal of the Soviet troops, my leaders have been expecting, and they said, it is not known how much time you're going to be there, and I actually stayed there up until the end of 1992.
When Najibullah was defeated, and when we started the contact with Mojaheds, there was nothing critical, but the decisive factor was that the Soviet Union collapsed. And Afghanistan has always been dependent on the external impact. When Talibs in 2001 were defeated, and now the Talibs came with a very powerful support from outside. And the corrupted power led by Mashraf Afghani, though they stated great values, including education and culture, and all the world was helping them. But eventually, because of the major failures and high corruption and the wrong policy in the multi-ethnic, in ethnic relations and so on, no radical changes happened, both in the economy and the society. And the people got tired of that regime, and they wanted any power. They didn't meet with them with flowers, of course, but did not oppose much. They tried to revive the former North Atlantic Alliance, but the Kabul power didn't allow that. There was a certain reason when there was military, when there was the army, why should they establish the sort of localized defense powers? Talibs eventually, with threats or bribes, and in some cases they eradicated those whom they didn't want to have, they came to power. Talibs keep saying that they came to power without blood, without war, but during 20 hours they have been terrorists, and the Russian ambassador gave an interview saying that I felt like quiet in Kabul, because of course yesterday Talibs explode and made explosions, and now they don't have to explode because they came to power. This is why it's quiet there. But still, now probably it doesn't make sense to invent anything, because the mechanisms already exist. And there was a very good initiative of Istanbul process, and we have SPECA, RECA. They are all pretty well functioning. They are all aimed integration of Afghanistan, revival of Afghanistan. And Kazakhstan was involved in all these initiatives. We completed a big educational program. We trained 1,000 students in various professions, and many years ago they completed these studies and they worked in their own country, and I think it was a very powerful support. And when the question was raised about the Talibs of 2001 and 2021, our colleague said that they remain the same, but the society has changed, and now Talibs have to promise that they will observe the human rights, they will use the media, they learned to operate TVs and social media, they make very powerful advocacy, and now they can take care of the women. So previously it wasn't possible for the women to walk outside, and now they have to deal with that, to live with that. And I think that this process will become even deeper. And even though we are saying that there would be threats and Taliban will merge with Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations, but most unlikely that any country will bring any troops into Afghanistan. So very much will depend on how Talibs behave, not on how what we are going to do. And now the whole world is behaving somehow in a restrained way. And already Uzbekistan and China are saying that that the country could be recognized, but most of the countries will stay back and will not make any actions. Somebody said that Taliban has about 20 groups inside. Let Taliban take care of who will win, whether there will be Trotsky kind of groups or the Bolsheviks. So they have to take responsibility for their actions. Somebody says that we have to unfreeze the accounts. We should provide some kind of aid to them. But how could we provide any aid if they don't comply with some principal things such as human rights and so on? So the ball is on their side now. So there would be not much sense from talking. Afghans should address their internal problems first. And some respected persons ask me, why do we train them? Why do we do anything for them? Let them fight themselves and define their fate. And if they try to attack us, we will defend our countries. I decided not to read what I've written here, but the view of the country has been voiced out by the president. We are supporting the independent country of Afghanistan, and it should be the people, so humanitarian component will remain. And we take certain measures, and we know that some of our compatriots, though not very numerous, stayed in Afghanistan, so we had to bring them back by air flights. So we keep contacts with the current power in Kabul. Thank you very much. I know that it was brief, but still it was pretty deep. Let me reiterate. I understand you and you understand me that it is for the first time during several decades that it was the chance for Afghans to try to decide for their country themselves. To what extent they would be capable of finding a path. I believe that they can, because the society has changed and there are a lot of people, and I know that they would be able to do so. And if they lose this historical chance, it will not be good. But if they manage to take advantage of it and take all the challenges and build a normal and well-balanced state, it will be a great advantage, not only for Central Asian region, but to the entire continent of Eurasia. And at the end, I will make a few comments about Big Eurasia. I'm really pleased to give the floor to Professor Akimbekov Sultan. You know, I already mentioned that 20 years ago, I opposed him in his dissertation paper about Afghanistan. And he's considered to be one of the best experts in Kazakhstan regarding Afghanistan. The floor is yours, and I hope that given the time limit, we only have 1 minute left, but I think that the organizers will give us additional 5 to 10 minutes. Please, Sultan, be brief. Thank you very much. I would try to be brief. Well, first of all, what I would like to say that I wouldn't be so optimistic about the people that would be able to decide for themselves. That in the current status, it sounds very dubious, given that if we are talking about the attempt to engage the government, it's not the story about current status. At the moment, it's the centralized power who can very clearly suppress any opposition. And it's only a small part of power, and it's not even Kushtum power. And as Mr. Haqqani mentioned, it's only part of Kushtums who are very archaic and related to the eastern part, bordering with Pakistan, and it does not include the population of Kabul, fully excludes Hazarians and Uzbeks, who are absolutely surprised by the current events, and speaking that without Talibs they could give a chance to the country, it would sound awkward in this situation. And by the way, during the last year, when regarding Doha, there are lots of conferences and negotiations. I participated in one of the conferences where the Afghani side asked a question to Kushtum, and they were very clearly aviating from the response. They would say they would emirate. What would be, how is it going to work? Through voting or elections? They said, no voting, no elections, we will do it ourselves. And given that 50% of Kushtums, which are 30% of population, it's clear that the representation of the people will not result in such this. So we will ask another question, why this has happened. A representative from Tajikistan asked a very nice question, why Taliban was established, why it was given such a path. If you look at the history of Afghanistan, it's this history of the secret operations and games of the governments of major countries. And to a great extent, the changes in the country are related to the major games. For example, in 2001, Talibs disappeared. First, they were as resistance, and then in November, they just disappeared within one day, except for some insulated enclaves. And at the same time, we can see that the government has disappeared in Afghanistan. At the same time, we understand that this is a very fair question, why they all disappeared, why the system has destroyed within a couple of seconds. And it's obvious that it's a feature or a sign of the fact that the model that Americans tried to build based on the Western model, taking into account the elections and high representation, eventually it was not very successful. And we can see that the opposition between various communities has not disappeared. And it was a very interesting statement by Harvard that any elections are a shock, and because nobody wants to look into the uncertainty, and this is a key issue. But on the other hand, if we look at why this didn't happen, we understand that it didn't allow implementing a number of other projects that we are discussing now, such as railway project Peshawar to Kairat, and a number of other projects about electricity and so on. They all needed financing, and in the conditions of civil war, banks will not provide any financing. So the question was how this could be somehow addressed. But the question was also that it had to be done pretty quickly, because if it's a war, when the Soviet Union took away the troops, it was a heavier war for 3 years. And then when we are removing our troops and we are saying that the Western model was a failure, we should recall the Eastern model. And for the Eastern model, you always need to find the right person to sign agreement with. For the Chinese country, it is important. So you need to have a figure to sign the agreement, and he will then be responsible for what is going to happen. And here we come to a very interesting thing. You can see that Iran did not say anything. China, Uzbekistan, Russia, a big number of countries except Tajikistan and India, that is only 2 players, who had negotiations, and everyone was enough that some people who were searched as terrorists could serve as guarantors. This is why my absolute impression that these negotiations were demonstrative, because everything was decided in advance. And here it is approximately clear why. By the way, beforehand, I would like to mention that it is almost clear that, in fact, that this catastrophically fast capitulation of all the provinces in the north where Hazarians and Uzbeks live, they all capitulated during a few days. How could that have happened? Let alone hundreds and thousands of people who still remember the North Alliance times and who were involved in the military actions. So they still agreed why they have done that. They could have been bribed, they could have been paid for. And the question is, who was able to organize that? Because China was very favorable to this issue, and Iran did not protect Hazarians. And Uzbekistan approached quite tolerant to this issue. Why? They were all happy about, except Tajikistan and India. Of course, Tajiks are the ones who will lose most, and India will lose as well. Most likely they were not informed about what is going to happen, in fact. And the question here is that the only country who could organize that and who was capable of doing that is Pakistan. Nobody else would be. This would include bringing people. In Pakistan, there are lots of Pashtuns. They could be organized, and nobody could recognize them as non-local. In Pakistan, there are lots of madrasas where Taliban could get a lot of troopers in 1990s. We are pretty well aware that in Pakistan in 1990s, the army and the intelligence supported. Now we come to the politics. Why this is needed? In the conditions of instability of Afghanistan and the lack of and failure of the Western model to address the issue of security, this caused the need that there would be somebody who would take responsibility for that. And identifying this person or the figure could be Afghanistan. And the question was, who will finance that? The question, Pakistan and China have a lot of projects, including projects for addressing the energy security of Pakistan, 7,000 megawatts of deficit of electricity. Will that address it? Yes. Does Uzbekistan need the railway to the south? Yes, it does, because it's a strategic priority, because so there could be lots of models that exist at the moment. So therefore, and also the Pakistan will remove from the agenda the line, the borderline between Afghanistan and Pakistan that was drawn by the Englishmen. What was of concern is for Pashtun what was caused by the royal dynasty from Kabul, were very literate, who could put together the ideology, and the eastern people, tribalist Pashtuns, they did not care about this borderline, because for them it was not so important. The Pashtun nationalists of the state nature, they're mostly, for the last 150 years, they're mostly Turanese. If we recall Khani Tarzai, he also was a Turani, and he had conflicts with Pakistan. So this is a complex issue. And now the question is, if now Pakistan is responsible for Afghanistan, I think it was you, Matai Makash, that the Durn line is now transferred to the border with Uzbekistan. So by doing this, they address all the internal issues. And now I think that all these projects will start implementing very quickly, because this is important for Pakistan. And any issues of opposition, of inclusive government and so on, nobody cares about that anymore. Yes, I think that Pakistan will ensure security of roads and corridors, and Pakistan will ensure more or less acceptable behavior of Taliban. They will not go beyond any framework to be able to implement the projects, and Afghanistan will stop being the country that people will feel some concerns. For example, in Somali, we don't care what is going on. We forgot what happened there. So this could be the future that, in fact, for us is not very good, because we understand that Pakistan could be a good country, and we understand that it is a nice country, but there are lots of religious institutions that are present there, and this was discussed a lot, and they have a lot of training institutions.
To train pretty radical team leaders, and who knows, for instance, if tomorrow all Pakistan madrasas from northwestern region are going to be moved to Mazar-e Sharif, and will train Uzbek and Tajik students. Thank you so much. I think I talked too much. However, what I would like to say and to add in the end is that with Taliban, we have to remember about one issue. You know, Taliban is a local Pushtun, a very narrow topic. However, I would like to mention that in Afghanistan, there was a permanent conflict in between the local Islamic tradition, in between Wahhabi Salafi movement and in Soviet presence, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, you know, they were supporting the opposition, opposing the Soviets. And after Soviet Union left and Najibullah surrendered, you know, not any single group remained. And actually we have to take that into account, how they, if we look at our own Central Asian region, you know, our radicals are more or less Salafis. You know, this is something that we have to study more thoroughly. We have faced an unclear situation, and this is something that we don't know well. So that's why we have some unpleasant feelings. However, it's not a ground to be panicking, and it is a nightmare, but not an absolute nightmare. Thank you so much, Sultan. Nobody is going to be panicking, and what I see is that within our panel, you know, we haven't made any panicking announcements or statements. So what I would like to say is that, for instance, we asked a question whether Talibs are going to be capable of not. You know, the Talibs, I think, to be capable, we would like them to be able to succeed, you know, in the region and beyond, to have Talibs manage to build the state of Afghanistan, you know. And firstly, I would like to say just a couple of words to add, because we have, you know, exceeded the time that we were given, and we need to leave shortly. You know, currently we have lots of tools, lots of instruments, and it is important right now, during any negotiations, it is extremely important for us in Central Asia to not only hear but listen to. This is the first point. And secondly, what I would like to mention is that the serious structures, CSTO, SCO, CIMA, you know, and other organizations who would be to a certain extent be involved into this process. So why are they existing for then? You know, what are they existing for then? And I would like the international organizations to be more and more engaged into the negotiations. Or perhaps we need to remember the initiative made by Nursultan Nazarbayev that he has proposed in the beginning of 200s to create Central Asian Union, you know. Why not to engage Pakistan and Mongolia, you know, to draw a line and make sure that the political geography is a science, you know. And I do realize that that initiative, when it was proposed by Mr. Nazarbayev, the way I understood it is that currently all 5 Central Asian countries have chosen their own path of development. They have different models. They're like 5 fingers. You know, we have a national dish in Kazakhstan called beshparmak, translated as 5 fingers. every single finger is different. However, the conceptual idea of our first president, Nazarbayev, was to have those fingers staying within one hand, for them to coexist together and for them to act as a wrist if need be. Right, and there are different tools, different instruments in global policy to include those while we are discussing the situation in Afghanistan. So why not? And thank you so much once again, dear ladies and gentlemen. I would like to say thank you words to the organizers. Thank you for this constructive dialogue and short information. In the middle of November, Nursultan Nazarbayev Fund is going to be having the meeting for the members of the club, and we are going to be having a panel devoted to Afghanistan. We have 2 more months. So I would like to invite those who have participated to today's roundtable to participate to those discussions as well. And let us see what is going to be happening in 2 months' time. Thank you so much and have a great time.